So we will explore a feminist theory and to be or not to be. I think this one could be good. Now, I'm making this myself, all right? So all the theories that we explore, I come up with them on my own. No chat GPT. I'm just kidding. All right, so this is messed up, all right? So this article is from the New York Times, right? And it came out in 2022. And it talks about eugenics in America. So eugenics is population control based on ethnicity, or like um, genetics, some type of either ethnicity, or it could be like if you were born with Down syndrome or autism, even. Well, technically, autism would be different because you can't. Doctors can't predict autism during pregnancy, but like some Down syndrome. There's a few other Fragile X, they can see that in an ultrasound. But if we were going to do a feminist theory, right, we can talk about this article. Now, this is a story. It begins with the story of Minnie and Mary. There were two girls. They were living in a Montgomery, Alabama public housing unit. And the government had actually funded these programs, these federally funded clinics, and um, to sterilize Black, Latina, and Indigenous women. And 100,000, if not more, they're not sure. They know that at least more than 100,000 women of color were sterilized under these U.S. programs. So we could do an analysis. From 1907 to 1932, 32 states passed explicit eugenics laws that allowed for the government to sterilize the insane, the feeble minded, the dependent, and the diseased. 8 of those 32 states have issued formal apologies. So if I was going to start this, we could say Kurt Vonnegut is known as one of the greatest American authors of all time. And his stories shed light on political, racial, and economic injustices. While To Be or Not to Be is not renowned as a feminist classic, one could say that the entire story is based on actual population control measures that were inflicted on minority groups, minority and disenfranchised women throughout American history. All right. And then I would even go in to say, so if this is kind of your example of the thesis, right? I'm bringing in our information about Kurt, and then so here between this would be the thesis, right? And then this is your intro, your topic sentence there, your grabber. So in between there, I will give some background on the story. We can say to be or not to be centers around a protagonist's father, Edward Welling, whose wife has just given birth to triplets. The problem is with the laws in the society with the laws which state that when one person is born, another person must have a government sponsored assisted suicide. The problem is with the laws. I want to change this. We could say, what if we say conflict arises due to the dystopian law stating that if a couple wants to have a baby, they must find an adult willing to die to create space for the child. So there we have um, a very brief summary. Even we could even add like Edward is able to Edward comes to the decision that he would murder the hospital's doctor, a suicide um, hostess, and himself in order for his 3 infants to live. Not once in the story does the reader meet Mrs. Welling or see the perspective of a woman who just spent, we could say, hours in labor to birth 3 children she may not be able to take home. So that would be important because like this, I mean, I want to know how she feels. We can assume how she feels. She feels horrible. This is a devastating sacrifice. And we could also say from a feminist perspective that Mrs. Welling went through a lot more than Mr. Welling. Um, Obviously dads love their children the most as much as mothers, but Mrs. Welling would have experienced this pregnancy for 9 months. We could say that her bond with these 3 infants was going to be stronger than Edward's, although Edward does sacrifice himself. But now we get into the analysis, the feminist analysis, where we're going to give some historical background, okay? And you could do a whole paragraph. Well, to be or not to be, one could say that the entire story is based on actual population control measures that were inflicted on minority and disenfranchised. So your body paragraph would look something like this. We could say, throughout America's history, the government has imposed population imposed various sterilization programs on both women and men, but we're sticking to women here, right? So we can say, in the story, Mrs. Welling was Mrs. Welling. Mrs. Welling's newborn infants are threatened with infanticide if her husband cannot find 2 more people to volunteer for assisted suicide, right? All right, so then we can say it is interesting, it is imperative, it is imperative to note that over 100,000 women in America were forcibly sterilized against their knowledge or consent. And then I'm going to go back up. So I might even use this direct quote here because I like it. Here we go. And I might introduce this quote with the New York Times article itself. So like here, I'll give you an example. I might say I'm going to introduce, because I'm really only going to use this article for this feminist theory analysis. So I would say The Long Shadow of Eugenics in America by Linda Villarosa. Okay. Oh, so here's how I'll introduce our article. In 2022, I didn't say it. Linda Villarosa. Linda Villarosa published The Long Shadow of Eugenics in America. The Long Shadow of Eugenics in America in the New York Times. In 2022, Linda Villarosa published Long Shadow uh, and stated, there we go. So there's the quote, and I introduced where I got this from. The New York Times is super credible. But it depends on what your teacher has. So sometimes a newspaper article isn't going to be fit your requirement. You might need a scholarly journal article, but for the purpose of we're just doing this for fun. I don't know why people do this wrong, but anyways, all right. So I put the quote in. Now I'm gonna say, I'll put her last name. So it was Villarosa. Now I want to give my quote some explanation here. Vonnegut painted Vonnegut painted an authoritarian um, Vonnegut painted an authoritarian future where the government um, placed strict restrictions on women's uh, on a woman's right to motherhood. It is You could have a philosophy that nobody has a right to be a parent, but I guess that isn't the case. So we can say here, however, America's past is shrouded in unethical sterilization practices. So, however, and governments deciding who in a society is fit to breed is not a new practice. So I would then go on. So if this was your body paragraph, right? And I'm proving my thesis. Here, I'm going to take this one and put it down. Let's see. So in your next paragraph, or adding to this body paragraph, we can talk about how, let's see, however, America's past is shrouded in unethical sterilization practices, and governments deciding who in a society is fit to breed is not a new practice. And governments deciding who in a society is fit to breed is not a new practice. We can say here, Mrs. Welling is left worrying that she will not be able to take her triplets home. But thousands of women in America have been left wondering why they are unable to conceive at all. And then there was this one lady. Wait, let's see if. So that's them. Actually, I'm going to use a more current one. So even as recent, this is from the 1960s. Census data showed in the 1960s, for the first time, Alabama's urban population exceeded that of rural, and the state was nearly one-third black. This influx of rural black residents, most unskilled and lacking education, increased poverty in Black communities and in southern cities. And then they're talking about the two girls in the story. So what ended up happening to them is if you were getting government assistance, you would be flagged. And then Lyndon, wait, it wasn't Lyndon Johnson, it would have been Nixon. So Richard Nixon in 1967, he created this Family Planning Services and Population Research Act of 1970, gave federal funding to clinics like women's clinics, right? And now, if we go down to what actually happened, so we had this family moved into public housing, the Ralph sisters, those two girls, Mary, um, and they're started to be given shots, contraceptive shots, that were not even FDA approved. And it was basically the American government running a clinical drug trial on girls that were living in public housing. And then it caused a bunch of health problems for them, right? You could find a way to relate that into the story, I'm sure, or into your analysis if you want to. But one of them is this. Okay, so Katie is taken to the family planning clinic, and she was inserted an IUD, but then never told about it. So she didn't know that this IUD was inside of her body. And the other two girls, you had Minnie. These were Minnie's two youngest, were 14 and 12. And the clinic workers have Minnie sign something, and Minnie doesn't, she's illiterate, and they don't explain it to her. So her daughters get taken to get their tubes tied. This would have been a hysterectomy. So at this point, they're never going, they can never get pregnant again. So we could talk, how would we word this? In the 1970s, President Richard Nixon enacted family planning eugenics measures that resulted in the forced sterilization of, we'll put them, Mary Alice. Wait, Bly was so shaken up. Oh, so this is Bly's like the lady that was brought in to like, she was black and she was brought in by the clinic to kind of like ease the family's worries. She was used, you could say, in order to sterilize these young black girls. Wait, where is we want the one about her? Before Minnie got back. Wait, on June 17th, she's gonna get the two younger girls. What were the both? We had Katie return to the Ralph's apartment. We'll say the Ralph sisters. Of the Ralph sisters when they were teenagers. And then I will put this, Villarosa, because I'm in a new paragraph. And then we would tie this in, governments making family planning decisions at the behest of women is a long-standing American tradition. I'm being a little dramatic here, but and from a feminist perspective, readers may are left feeling unheard, or we could say are left feeling ignored, considering a dystopian story is being presented. What could we say? Are left feeling ignored, considering a dystopian story is given more attention than historical wrongs. And that would be my ending. And I would, if I was making this the ending, that this is a dystopian fiction story. And people are like, wow, that would be so terrible if that happened to women, right? But it did actually happen to women. And the one part here, it also goes in to talk about this was in 2003. Okay, wait. Um, More sterilizations just for people being poor. Here in 2017, Judge Sam Bennington of White County, Tennessee, was reprimanded for promising 30-day sentence reductions to incarcerated men and women who agreed to receive vasectomies or birth control implants. Benningfield claimed he was trying to encourage people personal responsibility and prevent incarcerated people from being burdened with children when they were released. I don't know. Do you guys think that's what Judge Sam Benningfield had in mind? But that would be a really good I want to add it. All right, here. So I could say um in fact, in 2017, a Tennessee judge was reprimanded for offering incarcerated individuals a reduced sentence. Wait, I'll say offering um wait, they were being sentenced. Oh wait, no, they were incarcerated. They already were. Okay, individuals a reduced sentence of 30 days if they received a vasectomy. Not going to spell this right. Vasectomy men or um birth control shot women. Then this this shows that government personnel always um this shows that governments continue to press upon family, we'll say continue to press family planning prevention measures on the masses. And that would be an example of the feminist theory. I'm focusing on Mrs. Welling, who was absent from the story. And obviously, because she was absent from the story, you would be mentioning that. So if you're writing a feminist theory, and let's say there was a female character talked about, but she didn't really have a big role in the story. That's a good example of how you could say her exclusion in the events is something to be noted. It shows that the author had a misogynistic attitude, or maybe it shows just that it says something about society at the time, the culture, that women were second class citizens. Their presence in society was simply to birth children. And you could do a feminist analysis based on the lack of women characters. That would be like a feminist criticism. We're criticizing the author's story for its lack of femininity.